Good morning. Welcome to the Ship of a New Story and a point where we will be discussing change. How can we change and what makes us change? Together with me, I have, my name is Tomas, and together with me, I have Kristin Grimsdottir, Maria Appelqvist, and Mikael Sillion, who are all working with change in some areas. Welcome everybody. And first question I would like to ask is, how can we change? What is it that makes us change? And where does change start?
My God, that's a really big question, Thomas. And I think a lot of in most of our organizational leaders thinks it's their tasks to create change. But for me, it's important to understand that change always starts on an individual level. And we each individual have to see that change starts with me. I can't change anybody else than me, basically.
Thank you. Thank you. Kristin?
Yeah, I can. I think fundamentally change is inevitable. So we are kind of meant to change both as individuals and as society over time. And I think in the structure of society, we have designed structure to not change. And I think that is also what kind of creates crisis, because the systems are disrupted and kind of forcing us to change, which is supposed to happen. So I think the topic of change is really, really interesting, and how we lead in change. Maybe not that we should be the creator of change, because that is more the norm, but how do you actually find ourselves in change and how we lead from there in a sustainable way. So I think that is a little bit my perspective into this discussion of change.
Thank you. Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, change is a curious concept. The state of the universe is never the same 1 second from the other. At the same time, on a human level, we have all kinds of things in our lives that keeps it constant. Like we have behavioral patterns, training of skills, and so during a human lifespan, much of we do the same things every day, and then around that we have built a society with institutions, laws, cultures, and rituals and everything that promotes a constant feed of recurring events and a recurring story and narration of who is and who we are. But at the same time, we are innovators and changers. So and there's a curiosity in humanity that becomes, let's say, very present during current day. Like if you see the technology market with iPhones and gadgets and internets, there's something that's called cult of the new. As soon as a new product comes out, many people, ooh, new and shiny, we want that. So that's a type of change. And I'm a board gamer, and we are very we victim to this cult of the new. As soon as a new board game come out, we all want it and want to play it. But not all humans are this. So there's a dynamic there. We have the cult of the new. We have rituals that don't prevent change. And there's some people say that our whole society is an immune system that slows change down. But at the same time, we have what we call the great acceleration now, when the speed of innovation speeds up, the speed of change speeds up in itself. And we are not prepared to this, because this is not something we have trained for our whole life to handle change like this. So they're very curious to be alive in a life and situation like this. But foremost, we have to develop this curiosity to understand that we now must change. Much of the things we've been doing for the last couple of thousand years in our society, it's not working out anymore. And so we have to open up for a new type of curiosity, for a new way of thinking, not just the new tools and gadgets, but actually the new type of personalities and behavioral patterns we have to develop inside ourselves.
Okay, thank you. So if we play with the thoughts that change comes from inside the individual, how can we promote the curiosity you're talking about, Michael, and start, how should I say, to make this curiosity happen and to make people start to open up, except for that I can do it on myself, but how can I try to influence others to open up and be open to change?
You know, I think the question is actually much more complex than thinking that we all want to change. Understanding our psychological needs, we learn there's different kind of psychological needs. And my assumption is that we all here in this panel, we have actually change development. It's part of our psychological needs. That's why we even here in the conversation. And that's also why a lot of people are talking about change, is because it's the drive in life. But if you have other drives in life, like for instance, affinity or safety or variation might not be there, but there is certain kind of psychological needs that wouldn't be that willing to, like people with development need and contribution and variation, that would be the needs that are more aligned with creating change. And often we see those kind of people in organizations who are leading the way for change. They are also aligned with these psychological needs. But often the organization itself has all the other psychological needs, variations represented. And I'm not even sure if they are willing or ready to, because that's not part of how they perceive life, basically. So sometimes we forget about how our perception of seeing change as something natural, and we, you know, everybody has to adapt to it. But I think now, for instance, the pandemic illustrates really well how different organizations cope with change. So we see some organizations that in the new situations are thinking like, wow, we're not going to cancel. Instead, we find new ways how to do what we're doing. So they are just open up and doing digital meetings, and they are willing to change and willing and open to just change their behavior. But others, they are still, from the beginning, they were staying stuck in the, oh, now the pandemic, we can't create events any longer as we used to, we cancel. And they were postponing for a couple of weeks until they realized they had to, in some way, adjust themselves to, we are in a change situation and we have to rethink our way how we're doing things in this organization. So you can really see how the pandemic highlights the distinctions between two different kind of types of organizations, but I would also say they express different kind of leadership that also are naturally looking for working in these organizations, because as we all know, we have certain kind of organizations like the bureaucracy. It's not supposed to change, right? Because they are representing stability, order, regularity, you know, all this that are based for what creates the secured and predictable decisions, right? Not adjusted to change. So we have these, the whole time we holding these different complexities between change on one side and one hand, and the other one is safety. And we all, as human beings, also have it inside of ourselves, right? But and some are more aligned to change development and others more to safety, security. And that means I don't want to see change happen in my daily life. Maybe I'm interested in a new iPhone, but not changed in my working situation.
Kristin, Michael, any thoughts around that?
If I can take it from there, I think it's extremely interesting. And what you describe as psychological needs there, Maria, I see it also connecting to values, really our deep-rooted values, which is something I have been working a lot with. And given the situation of the COVID-19, the pandemic that we're going through right now, to be on the personal notes, my kind of commitment to the field I'm working now arose in the financial crisis in Iceland 12 years ago. And I've always been really interested in people and human behavior, psychology, neuroscience, and even biology connected to human behavior. Yet I went the educational path of becoming an engineer. And not because I want to become an engineer, but because I was curious in the people who were in the initial path of maybe becoming the leaders of the future. How do they think, act, and communicate from the very, very beginning? And what really arose my curiosity there 12 years ago was that I didn't really understand the decisions they were made in the times of crisis, especially in the perspective of how we make decisions that are good for people and planet. And when you're talking about kind of the context of where decisions are made and what values or psychological needs are like basing those decisions, I think it's extremely important. And I just came into, when you were talking, Maria, I got a reminder on Facebook from this time, because what I have been doing since then is all about understanding this. And I did my master thesis on the values and conscious stories of what I call for higher ambition leaders. So leaders who are running organizations or companies that have a higher ambition than just generating profit. And I saw this text that I just wanted to kind of read up here. Where it says, every style of leadership is the consequence of the values of the individual leaders in relation to the contextual setting and the people there. That leadership style is appropriated because the environment does reflect the values of that context. The reason why some organizations, or whatever context, if you talk about entire country, run autocratically, others collaboratively, it's not that a single person decides to do things that way, but because the values in the environment and the situation demands it. So it's not just about kind of the people, it's also about the collective context. And that's why when you're talking about kind of how to grow from local to global, or like from a small context to a broader context, I think it's a lot about to understand the values of society and the collective consciousness of the context, to understand how we can enable that change and what change is needed. So I think kind of values and consciousness and understanding that is of great importance to facilitate change.
Thank you, Kristin. Michael?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying here, and I'm thinking like the things we can do. Like we're deeply habitual creatures, and once we become adult, the set path for us is usually set for the way of seeing society, and we have a slow progression towards mastery in whatever path we choose for our life. But that is not true anymore, and we now have to dwell much deeper into what we call lifelong learning, where we stay in learning mode throughout life in a new way. And I talk to a lot of people about lifelong learning, and many people get the story. It's about you're furthering your career or learning new career skills, but it's much more than that. It's having like a career, like really go into the skill set of curiosity itself. How do you keep yourself curious? We know this is a skill and a trait human can evolve, so we can get much better at it. So the more you practice curiosity, the better you become at it, and then you go into a set where you are curious about everything, and you go into what you call a learning mode, that like you when you are young. So we can practice to keep this mindset and skill open throughout our lives. So that's the one thing we have to do. But on an institutional level, like you said, many of our bureaucracies and laws and regulations are here to not create chaos in society. So we actually have a stable society with a lot of, where we know what's going on, and we can go to a place and we know what to expect. But at the same time, if we want to change something, we have to create something outside that, and that's what some people call like a sandbox environment, where we can start prototyping. We say we create a block in a city, here there are no laws. We will monitor it closely to see that that doesn't go out of shape, it becomes chaos. But we can say on this block there's no laws. You can try different ways of living, different ways of doing a company, or different ways of doing a restaurant or whatever. But you create a prototype zone and a sandboxing zone and says here anything goes. And on a municipal and city level, you can have like, this is a budget. We have the $10 million here in a bucket that goes for a prototyping. Anything goes. So there's no expected result in money or KPI, and that can goes for a company as well. So we create prototyping budgets. And I've been talking a lot to the people of Trondheim that has a project called Learning Society. Christian Möyen is one of the leading person around that really explore this. How do you do this on a city and a policy level? So it's certainly possible, but it's very hard work. Because many of the people working today are not comfortable with this type of mindset and working. So.
Oh, that's extremely curious. I would love to hear more about that, Mikael.
Yeah, and it's also what I'm hearing, Michael, is the importance of education, like training people to be self-reflective, and that's really something in education. And for me, who also is teaching at the university in leadership and organization, one of my stake of being there is that I do think that we have to change the whole educational system as well. So not only teach students how to analytically think about things and identify problems and how to define problems from different perspectives and talk about it, but also becoming this kind of reflective agent themselves. And right now I'm really inspired by integral theory that really speaks about a different level of consciousness, right? And I've been working with that before with entrepreneurs, helping them to see where they are at level as an entrepreneur, because it's all about understanding on each level, there is a totally different mindset needed for taking your business from one level to the next level. In the same way as you need a different kind of people around you in order to create an organization, also from one level to next level. But also when it comes to relationship, of what kind of relationship you want to create, right? Because when you're on the higher consciousness level, like orange and green, you really ask questions like, who are we together? What are our values? But when you're still in survival mode on the red lower level, then those questions doesn't even are on the agenda. And I think a lot of time organizations becomes stuck in the kind of how we survive mood. And in particular in the pandemic crisis, it becomes even more of survive mood. And then in those situations, there's not much time, much space for the growth and for being reflective and thinking, because it takes a different mindset, and that comes from reflective learning, educating yourself, knowing about yourself, but asking yourself, being curious, like you're saying, Michael, asking yourself new kind of questions.
I think this is an extremely important point that you're pointing on there, Maria, because if you're not conscious enough, we react, it's like our body reacts in times of crisis, and it kind of closes our mind, and it's much more difficult to be reflecting in a learning mode if you're not conscious. If we are more conscious, and you talk about the level of consciousness, which I really dug deep into, it really shows that the people who have a higher state of consciousness, they can have a broader perspective, and they actually make a better decision for the whole. And I think the more people who have the ability to be so conscious about what happens in their body, that they can kind of go out of there. We talk a lot about when we are creating better situation in society, we have to kind of get people out of that survival mode. And we don't only do that by giving people money or giving people jobs, because then you're not actually growing. So more about, as Michael goes into, the learning mode, or like enabling the growth. So actually, how can we facilitate that in society, so it's not only about the what and the how, but actually going from inside and enabling that growth in people to come further in their level of consciousness.
Yeah, I just want to build on that because I think it's interesting. So I've been in the coaching industry I was one of the pioneers in Sweden and part of starting the International Coach Federation in Sweden. And I've seen, for instance, how Sweden as a country has handled coaching as a profession. It became something for unemployed people. But in other countries, like in UK and Ireland, the government use coaching as a leadership tool. So coaches get government fundings for working with school leaders, educational leaders. And I think maybe that's why also coaching has grown into becoming a profession more and more, is also the role it play into facilitating learning in organizations. But the interesting thing is that some countries have really implemented it as a more of a state policy, that they target specific public sectors, giving them leadership coaching. While in Sweden, we gave it to immigrants and unemployed people. So we sort of degraded professional coaching into something else. And I think that also shows some kind of view of how the society as a whole view change and development and growth. Just the idea of understanding the complexity of how to facilitate long life learning.
Yeah. Michael, what do you say?
I like to take the answer. When I talk about this, I usually use the example of sports or athletes. So we all expect elite athletes and sport teams to have coaches and trainers, and we expect them to get up early in the morning, go work really hard on their training and skill and team play, whatever it is, and like we expect them to be the top performers. But at the same time, many of us on a private level, we go to the gym and keep our physical bodies in part, but we don't go to a wisdom gym. We don't have a cognition coach training us every day. We don't have a curiosity teacher that every week checks in on us, or even a mentor or a coach. And we don't have that full team around us that trains us in all the other skills we need for our professional lives. And there's a lot of talk what they now call the 21st century skill, and then actually a Wikipedia page that sums it up right now, so that I'm constantly referring to. But like, we have to have this mindset. It has to be mandatory to go to the wisdom gym every week as a human being, or else we're not expected to participate in society. If you can use this metaphor of our favorite football team or sports team, we say we all expect them to be in the top performance and been training hard all week for the match on Saturday, but we don't expect us humans to be on a top performance training all week for us to be a good parent or a good friend and stuff like that. So why is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I like how you're posing that, Michael.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So how do you think we can promote the questioning of the values that are hindering us from opening up? You said Sweden is quite different from many other countries. What values do you think that are actually hindering us there? Is it the feeling of safety and we're doing well, so why change? Or
yeah, I think you're on something there, Tomas. I think there is something in the Swedish mentality of like, we are leading by example. We are showing the rest of the world how we're doing things from once upon a time it was on how to receive refugees, which became a failure, to how to handle a pandemic. And so it's something about how we have some kind of attitude, how we are showing other countries the way. And at the same time, we know we have this book about how we are, as a population, one of the safety thirsting people. People are looking for safety and being thirsty for safety. What was that? The trygghetsnarkomanernas land. We are not really willing to represent change. I mean, in other countries, well, now if we go to one like United States, the normality is that people are moving, right, many times, and they're moving between different states. A lot of Swedish people, like of the nationals, don't really move. They grow up in a place and they stay there and they live there for the rest of their life. I think that can be, I'm not sure, maybe, I mean, if we're looking globally, what I'm trying to say, if we're looking globally when it comes to values and attitudes, actually Sweden are an outsider from many other countries in many ways.
I was thinking people say that the human being is more afraid to lose what he has than excited about to get what he could. Could I get your views on that?
I can take a little dig into that. I think it's extremely interesting question. I have dug a lot into that topic, and in 2012, I actually gave up. I was living and working in Stockholm at that time, but I was so curious about why people generally do what they do, and I didn't want to go like into university or do a study. I just wanted to live it. So I sold all my belongings and got rid of my job and apartment, and I started biking. And I actually biked all the way down to Greece from Stockholm just to meet totally random people and listen to the personal stories. And it became so clear that so many people are living their thoughts and fears of what could possibly happen. The stories we tell ourselves to be reality is probably our biggest obstacle. And when we're talking about the context of Sweden, I come from Iceland, as I said, and it's in a way the culture is not so different, but in a way it is. And I think one of the biggest differences is exactly this, that I'm grown up with being in the risk of avalanche, like. And the weather is always changing, and we are so few people, so the dynamic in society is totally different. You don't plan long ahead because you don't know what will happen in a day or two. So you live in a change kind of always and are stimulated by that. When I moved here to Sweden, kind of the first question I got is like, what are you going to do week 15? And it's like week 1. And I was like, do you really count in weeks? And everything is really, really predictable. People don't come like knock on the door because they don't know your home. Like everything is known. And it was kind of shocking for me how everything was predictable and planned for. And Sweden's a really nice country. It's a really, really good country to live in, but there are not so many kind of threats coming to you as a society, I would say. So it's really nice, but it also has kind of downsides for the growth, I would say, because I think we need kind of that kind of fluidity and stimulation to actually grow. So it's like two sides of that coin.
Yeah. Michael, can I get your view?
Yeah. So I'm like curious. I'm a big fan of like what we can do with storytelling, TVs, movies, TV series and movies and stuff like that, books around this subject. So it would be great for for that to be a well-produced TV series or Hollywood movie about concepts and things like this, because then we really can get the story across, and it can be in a setting in a silly comedy or action movie. Like I'm a big fan of The Matrix, how it changed me and many people's life. Many people I know today went into philosophy just because of The Matrix, and me included. So things like that really change us more than we know. It doesn't change everyone, but this is like a great way to get the story across on a broad level in a fun or relaxed setting, I think.
Yeah.
May I just like add on that, because I am totally with you with the storytelling. And after doing this biking, I remember I went into that and I said, I'm going to document everything. And I think it took less than a week when I realized that when I was documenting, I wasn't really there. And I just kind of changed strategy, and it's like my only purpose is to be present. And it was such a magical thing that happened, that when people tell their stories, when we are in a story, and especially a personal story, there is something that happens. And I know that you talked about, Maria, for example, what happens in the body. There is something that happens kind of in the vibration between people, and there is a connection, and there builds trust, and there is like an engagement. And it's so beautiful that happens with storytelling. You can't get the same effect like with a movie or with a book. So storytelling is extremely, extremely powerful, and actually literally changes kind of our biology.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah, I just love that, and I would like to build on it. The name of my company is actually Vibrational Shift, because I think it is a vibrational shift we have to do. And when I'm saying vibrational shift, it's a whole like different dimension. Like the different consciousness level creates a whole totally different both mindset, but also vibrational level of what you perceive and how you perceive the reality, and that creates the agenda for how you structure your day, or not structure, just intuitively following like being in the flow, right? Because I think people that are in the higher level of consciousness, they also manage to complete so much more during a day. So for instance, like I feel like a lot of people, they spend a lot of time working on something that I can do in a very, very short time. And I think it's about what you're saying also about being present, right? So when you're present, you're capable of creating something totally different. And I'm saying the same way how we structure this show, right? It's in the flow. It's not a clear like a agenda when we have a moderator that has pre-thought a lot of questions before, but it's about following the flow and being willing to tap into that. And that's really, for me, the Michael talking about 21st century skills. It's like it's the requirement for new leadership abilities. And that's something that very few people have got in contact with, because it requires that you do the investment in yourself with going to the specific kind of trainings that can give you that experience, or working with a mentor or coach that can give you that experience. And that can also be easy to find, it because people that are here on the more going to, they want to have a job, they want to have the interested into having this education as well. But I think if we can start talk about it from the sense of what you can create and the efficiency and the profit, but also more of like the balance you can find in your life of not feeling stress in your everyday life, because there is a lot of benefits of tapping into higher level of consciousness. How, there is not a problem of finding the balance between life and work, because you have it naturally in you, right?
And if I can just connect to that again, I think this is so beautifully said. And again, tapping into personal experience, I believe so much in that I think it's not 2 years ago, when I left my job as a sustainability manager in a large organization, to only, and I mean, many people thought I was totally crazy. I went and with my daughter, and we lived on a small island for a year to actually tap into that energy and only practice that for a year to be able to come out and just live and lead in that way. And I must say that it's so beautiful. And of course, I didn't see the epidemic coming. But being now in that situation with that kind of energy and being in the flow, it's absolutely beautiful. And now we're working with that here in Gothenburg, and kind of that just came to me, that now we have the possibility of working with that for the entire city of Gothenburg. How can we actually live and lead, and especially in in this pandemic, because a lot of organizations are suffering right now, and how can we actually turn tables and use this as an opportunity to live and lead in more sustainable way. And I think that is not just about the why and how, but actually leading in this way to be in the flow and kind of on that vibrational energy, if I'm allowed to speak in that way. It becomes so easy, to be honest, and so right.
Thank you. We have 10 minutes left. I would like to ask, what could we as individuals do to promote this this consciousness? How can we use storytelling to broaden the impact of or promote the increase of consciousness and openness onto. We were discussing going from local to global. We've been discussing a lot of our individual or individual aspects of it. How can we transform or send out the vibration so it connects to a majority of the people? It's a process, of course, but what would you suggest we could do as individuals to promote and go further, and what could actually leaders in organizations do to promote this?
I love this question, and storytelling is the communication tool for creating impact, because impact happens in the emotional field, and that is what storytelling can create. But it's an art. It's a skill to learn, right? So we can do maybe easily speaking or lectures, but telling stories is something. It's a skill to learn. And what I'm also hearing is that there is already an organization and in local municipalities a lot of leaders who are working with, who are having these stories. So I think maybe imagine if we could create platforms like new kind of conferences that becomes a platform where stories are told, how you're doing in Gothenburg, how they are doing in different organizations. So it becomes a storytelling conference about sharing the best practices, what is usually called, but it becomes in a storytelling way. And I think that could inspire others to learn from that. But it's also for a lot of leaders, it is a challenge to embrace themselves into stepping up and speaking, because I think of all things a leader do, the problem most vulnerable is speaking, because public speaking is something that is so vulnerable because I'm exposing myself. So it's really for the courageous and bold one who often have the courage to step up and do the storytelling and doing it in a way that it creates this impact, which is actually has the possibility to do. Yeah.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Do you want to go, Mikael, or should I?
You go first.
I also love this question, and I'm extremely curious about that. I don't have the answer, but we are actually working towards it. So as I mentioned, Gothenburg and Company here in Gothenburg, with the purpose to actually kind of promote the city of Gothenburg, has seen this need. And I'm now leading an initiative called Awake and Aware. And we are exploring this way, how we can actually use an event as a tool for change. And along with that, because the event is only a few days a year, we are creating a digital platform for those that we call Awake and Aware, who have woken up and seen that we have to change the way we live and lead. And that digital platform will be sharing stories and examples and giving experiences for people to increase the curiosity and go that way. So we're actually hands-on working on that right now, really in the initial phase, but we will have the first event next spring. And hopefully having the platform up and running early next year as a beta version. So it's a long journey that we have ahead of us, but we're also really, really curious about finding a way to be, as the topic of this, being the change and be extremely curious, listen in, be empathic, do it together. So everything is done in a co-creative process. So it's an exciting journey ahead, and we are looking forward to see what we find.
Sounds very exciting. Michael, please.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That sounds very interesting. I have to talk to you afterwards about it. Yeah, so my feeling is like for the consciousness part and the awareness part is I'm a big fan of the book Stealing Fire. If you haven't read it, it's a very good read.
It's my favorite. Oh,
yeah. And I met many of the people that are working on this globally. There's a movement that is based out of Palo Alto, Sophia University, with Nicole Bradford, that called the Transact movement, that explores this. How can we explore flow states coupled with tech and everything around that? So there's very many people and startups and organizations and actual physical products that explore in any way, shape, or form we can explore how we expand our consciousness and awareness and sensory input and everything around. That's a very interesting movement, but it's below the radar still on the mainstream media and stuff like that. And I also like in this, we have to see how we can explore flow states. This is one of the research parts of humanity. We are still in the novice area. What is it that connects people like this? And in this book, he talks about how Navy SEALs started instead of screening for people who are very highly sensitive of each other, starting to train people instead of this, and they have a great success with that. So this is stuff we can do. So how it's simple practices. How do you do a 2-minute consensus meditation before a meeting and stuff like that? Everything, stuff like that you can practice in your business and ordinary office life. There's all these kinds of little hacks and practices you can do to actually just raise the awareness and the question around this. And there's a lot of talk of mindfulness and the extended arm of that. So that's something that we can make much more mainstream, I think. And I'm also thinking about what can we do, on a deeper cultural level around this. Many of the people who are in this field go to festivals like Burning Man and stuff like that when we explore consciousness together. And there's a lot of taboo talking about psychedelic and stuff like that. I haven't done it myself, but there's a lot of people experiment around this. And there's actually serious research on this in Oslo University now. So maybe it's coming to Sweden as well. We don't know. But this is stuff we can do, I think. I think I have left it out. But also keep pushing for the storytelling and using the sport teams and the athletes example, because we all celebrate our biggest athletes and sports heroes, and ask the question, how can they become so great, and what are they doing in their daily life that we can adapt in our daily personal lives as well. So
thank you very much. We have 2 minutes left of the broadcast. I would like to thank you all for a very interesting insights and opinions and views, and for your stories. I would like to ask you for 3 words that you are taking with you from this meeting today, if I may. Michael?
Yeah, so sports team, curiosity, and storytelling then, yeah.
Kristin?
I say hope curiosity, and consciousness.
Thank you.
I say, yeah, inspiration, storytelling, and education. New
Thank you.
education.
I think it's been very interesting, and I'm taking with me more or less everything you have said to put the pieces into my jigsaw puzzle that I have.
Yeah.
So I would like to thank you all. It's been very interesting, and I wish you a really good day. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Same to you.
you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.